those needs. Because to me, I think there's 4 key aspects. Can the public comply with them? Can we enforce them? Can I charge them? And do you want to? Because that's a big question that I think has to be asked more. Can they comply? You need to make them simple. You need to make them clear. You need to make them fair, understandable. It's all 4 ways of basically saying the same thing. You have to write regulations that the public that you're trying to regulate can understand and can comply with. The number of times people have come to me and asked me a question about a regulation, and I pull out our reg book, and I'm sitting there and I'm reading it, and I'm reading it, and I'm reading it, and I can't really tell them what they need to do. We failed in our regulations. We failed there. The government hasn't done well. I've written some of those regulations badly. I've dealt with regulations written badly by others, but it's a failure. We have to fix those regulations. If I can't tell them what to do, we really sunk. Can we enforce them? Jeff already talked about a lot of this. There's a lot of challenges whether you're dealing with nearshore or distant NPAs. What are going to be the physical constraints? Can you have any access to witnesses who are going to be able to document them? Are these violations that all occur 100 feet under the water with a special hook that you have on a gear? How are we ever going to know? You need to think those things through. Can they be charged? Are the regulations clear? How many exceptions do you have? You always hear the jokes about federal regulations that you're getting into a situation where you're allowed to fish there, except not on alternate Tuesdays, and only when standing on your left foot on the right side of the boat wearing a green hat and a purple shirt. I mean, it's just too much. I mean, this is just crazy. So you need to try, and we need to, when we write them, make sure that regulations are going to be clear, that you don't have to put 12 caveats. If you've got to put 12 caveats on something you're trying to regulate, you're not regulating the right thing, in my opinion. Can we prove all the elements of an offense? It might be really easy to prove 4 of the 5 elements, but if that 5th element is something that we're never going to be able to have the proof of, the rest of it's sunk. We have to be able to prove every element. Intent, that's a question for you and for how you're going to do your regulations and what statutory authorities you have. But I got to tell you, not having to prove intent makes a prosecutor happy. But there are some violations where I think intent is going to be important, where you're going to want there to be intent because it's going to matter to you what someone's intent was in the actions. So that's a question you're going to want to think through in making any regulations. And just because my friends in the Coast Guard and my friends in NOAA, straight lines and not circles. When you're talking about MPAs and closed areas, we really like straight lines. We really like latitude and longitude. Those are really nice sort of 50-mile circles around something. Don't like those. The new marine monuments that we have at NOAA were all designated by presidential proclamation as 50 nautical mile circles around the island. But if you look at the regulations, they're square boxes. And they're a little more than 50 nautical miles. And that's for enforcement because we can't, circles suck. Let's just go with that. And only what you want to prohibit. And this also gets to the question that was asked earlier. Don't make laws that you don't want to enforce. It makes me crazy when people make laws that they don't actually want me to enforce. If you don't want me to enforce, don't make it a law. Don't make OLE go chase around trying to prove that there was a violation. Don't make that law. Don't make laws that you don't care whether they're enforced or not. You don't mind it, but you don't really care. Don't do it. It's a waste of resources and nobody has enough. Don't make laws that you don't need to get what you're trying to achieve. Don't make laws that you know you cannot enforce, and don't make laws that you know that you won't enforce. Lots of people will talk about voluntary compliance with laws that you can't enforce, and will say, well, you know, you get some of it. Okay, that's true. But I think you weaken your entire enforcement program when you make laws that you either don't, won't, or can't enforce. I think you weaken the program from start to finish. Training can't be overstated. We do training at every level. We train the JEA partners. We do training with the OLE agents. I do training with the volunteers. We do training with the fisheries observers. Training is good for the people you're training. It's good for the person doing the training. I understand the work of the Coast Guard, OLE, the observers, and the volunteers better because I train them. And I'm the one you eventually have to convince to prosecute your case. So that kind of relationship is critical. Training helps everybody. Needs to be done over and over and over and over and over again. And we all need training. I don't think I need to talk much about the community. I think that's been covered by some of the earlier presentations. It's going to be both your greatest ally and your greatest adversary, depending on what it is you're trying to do. But they're a terrific source of a reality check. For me, they're helpful because they tell me what's really happening when I don't really know, because I'm sitting in my office writing legal briefs. But they have to be transparent. For the community to have any buy-in, for the community to believe that there's fairness, you need to have transparent efforts. And there always has to be trust. Cases are built on relationships, whether the relationships between me and my agents, so they call me and we talk about the cases, whether the relationships with at-sea enforcement, relationships with the community, relationships with the programs who are going to be my witnesses and my experts, relationships with colleagues in other jurisdictions where you can pick up a phone and say, hey, you ever seen this? Have you ever done that? Do you know how to do that? Relationships are everything in terms of a successful case. Cultivate them, and they go both ways. So before we run out of too much time, these are my, unsolicited advice, my random tips and tricks for how I think it makes it all better, and most of them I learned the hard way from screwing up myself. But teach me well. Teach your prosecutor well, don't keep secrets. There's never a good time to keep the secrets from your prosecutor. It's my problem to deal with the bad pieces. It's my job to deal with the good and the bad of your cases, the good and the bad of your programs. If it doesn't work, the case goes away, okay, but don't keep secrets. Show and tell. When you don't have the luxury of a prosecutor devoted to natural resource enforcement, take them out on a boat. Show them a shark, show them a dolphin, show them a turtle, show them a this, show them a that, because getting them excited will get them to do your cases and will get them to do them better. If you can convince them, they can convince a judge. Blind faith has no place in court. Evidence trumps all. I know you get a lot of people who are true believers in this world. I believe the dolphins are being harassed. I believe this shark is this or that. It's great, but it has no place in the courtroom. True believerism is great in the world and terrible in a courtroom. Need evidence, need facts. Trust but verify, we heard that already. It's great when someone tells you something, but you need to be able to verify it, see the evidence, know what you're doing, and be sure of it. Relationships are great, trusting them is great, verify the facts. Cases don't get better with age, neither do memories. The faster you can move through your cases, the faster you can get a case into court, the better your witnesses will be, the better your case will be, the better the deterrent effect will be. It is not like wine, they just get worse. Problems left unsolved rarely solve themselves, except when they do, but I find you're gonna have the problems, you're gonna have to address them. If they're regulatory problems, if they're management problems, the sooner you start to identify them and circle back with the programs and give that feedback loop that was part of the question that you asked, the better you're gonna be able to keep your program moving forward. Never reinvent the wheel when you don't have to. That goes back to cultivating those relationships. And the last one's, mistakes will be made, often by me. Fix them. They rarely sink a case. Mistakes can always be fixed, but that's how the day goes. People try to hide them way too often. Hiding mistakes in enforcement cases, I think, is the surest way to sink a case. Cases will be lost. Cases should be lost. If you're not losing cases, I say this as someone who hasn't really lost cases, but as I said, I've got the deck stacked, but cases should be lost because it means you're pushing the envelope. It means you're taking cases, you're pushing your program further than it's necessarily been. You're not just taking the low-hanging fruit of the man standing there in front of you. It may not be personal to you. I forget this one sometimes because I like to play and I like doing these cases, but they're very personal to the people who are being charged, and remembering that as a program and a prosecutor is critical. Successful cases are 10% skill. With me, it's about 5%, and about 95% hard work and diligence and worry and stress, and a lot of the kindness of strangers who are going to be your experts and your witnesses and all your colleagues, and about 5% luck. And this is my last slide, and to me, these cases should never be about one case. It should never matter so much about winning any one case. It always has to be about the resource. It always has to be about deterrence. It always has to be about winning compliance. No one case should ever overshadow all those other pieces. And I think that's it. That's how you can find me. If you want to find any templates or documents or anything that I talked about, feel free to contact me and I'll get you copies.
for a couple questions.
Yeah.
Maybe just two. One is, what's the role of, advertising that these cases have been prosecuted for purposes of deterrence? Because we kind of heard, we don't hear too much about those here. And second, is there any initial thoughts on how enforcement and prosecution might happen if some of these coral species are now listed on the Endangered Species Act? I was just starting to think about, well, gee, I wonder what that all will mean in terms of.
Yeah, you and me both. Yes, publicity is good, and I think targeted publicity is particularly good, and we talk about this sometimes, and we probably talk about it more and do it less than we should. We think about it sometimes with the humpback whales and the humpback whale season, of being able to say in advance of each season, be able to say, here's what we did last season, these are the cases, we're prosecuting swimmers and kayakers and paddleboarders and whale watch boats and pleasure boats, and getting that message out. I think it's important. I think that loop is critical, and too often it breaks. And it often breaks in my office, where I do the case and I moved on to the next, and you forget to tell everyone about what happened in the case, who were the witnesses and the things, and that's something that I continually try to get better at, and often continue to not be as good at as I think. In terms of what we're going to do with the corals, your guess is as good as mine. My head's in the sand until it happens to me, and when it does, I don't know, pick my head up and see.
I have a quick comment just for the volunteers and officers alike. One thing just to help out with successful prosecution is articulation on your reports. You must be very articulate when you submit these documents to the AG's office. Photos, videos if you can, and statements from witnesses. Got to be precise. Sometimes if your cases are put together really well, you don't even go through the court process, you'll see a plea. Most of the time, that's the way it works back home with me. Credibility. Must protect your credibility as a witness, as a volunteer, and as an officer. And keep good notes. And for your question, your agency or group should develop a press release SOP upon conviction. That way, you don't have to name specific people, but there was an actual prosecution.
Yeah, you bring up a point that is one of my favorite soapboxes, which is that good reports is critical, and especially in MPA enforcement, and when you're talking about protected resources like dolphins and whales, reports that are clear and unemotional are really critical, because too often, especially with volunteers, they feel passionately about the issues that we're talking about, and you come in with reports, and the thing I always say about them is, if there's an exclamation point in the report, we have a problem. Because there is no place for an exclamation point in a report that's going into a case package, and your credibility is at issue, and it's not about you, it's about what happened. And often those reports are like, he called, he didn't listen to me, and none of that has any place in it. So you can't overestimate the importance of good reports.
Drew, then Salim.
Really quick, you mentioned in photo documentation, in today's day and age with digital photographs, is there anything about photographing that you need to make sure of so that it does stand up in a court if it's used, as far as like any cropping or editing, or do you ever run into that where it needs to be in a raw format?
Yeah, it's better to not muck about with the photos. I guess that would be my rule of thumb. Take the photos, document the time and the date that you took them, don't edit them, don't crop them, don't enhance them, don't do that to them. Give us the photos in the format in which you took them. If we want to do any of that as a demonstrative exhibit in a courtroom, that's different. But the photos as evidence, give them to us in their pure form would be my answer. Maybe my colleague who's coming up next might have a different answer.
One last question for Salim.
What percentage of the cases that you worked on where people weren't able to pay the fines, 50,000 or whatever fine it was, and what was the plan that you worked out with them in order to pay the fine, or did you have to lower the fine, or was there a time limit? And I was wondering, for the fines, thousands of dollars, is it going to a conservation fund?
Yeah, so I couldn't tell you the stats of exactly how many get paid, but most of our cases do get paid we do have, as I say, sort of this sliding scale of penalties related to the gravity and the nature of the violation. We do, if there is an inability to pay, we get their financial information, we will often then decrease the penalty or allow them to do a time payment. Our goal is to make sure that if we do have a penalty, that it's not something, although our statutes would let us make you go bankrupt or sell your house, that's not our policy, and so we don't do that. In terms of where the penalties go, they go to a variety of places. Primarily, they go into what we call an asset forfeiture fund that is not attached to any year's appropriation and is utilized by the Office of Law Enforcement and my Office for Enforcement Activities. It allows them to go out and do investigations, or if I have to go to a hearing, it pays for that kind of travel or bringing in witnesses. Some of them for violations that occur around CNMI, American Samoa, or Guam by foreign fishing vessels or domestic vessels. That money goes back to the territory. We just provided about $235,000 to CNMI of penalties that we had received from foreign vessels fishing in their waters. We take out some direct enforcement costs that go there. If it's one of our remote areas in this region, one of the Prias, Wake Island, Howland, and Baker, goes into something called the Western Central Pacific Fisheries, Sustainable Fisheries Fund that's utilized primarily by the Fisheries Management Council under a marine conservation plan. That money can be used for a variety of purposes, same with the territories.
Great, thank you.